The studio, we have James Heale, James, the political correspondent at The Spectator, with us. OK, Suella Braverman, is she looking to get sacked?
I wouldn't say she's actively looking to get sacked, but I think that she has real differences with the Prime Minister. And we've seen those sort of play out over the past few months or so, and particularly heightened up this past fortnight. And I think there is a serious difference of opinion within the party between the MPs, the minority, I'd say, who support Suella Braverman really ardently, and the majority, who I think, are getting a bit tired of it. If
they are the minority, why worry about them?
Because the Conservative Party is a fragile coalition, and that I think Rishi Sunak is seen as needing to keep together those MPs in more red wall seats, along with those traditional blue wall seats, for 12 months or so before an election.
It's interesting because, I mean, as you say, they've got quite a lot of differences. They need each other, or they at least certainly used to need each other. I mean, he got her support to become Prime Minister, and, you know, the deal was she got that job and that she was free to do her own thing. Certainly seems as though that relationship is breaking down, at least if not publicly, behind the scenes with that Times article last week. If he doesn't sack her, is he weak? Or, you know, what would be the reasons for keeping her?
So I think the reasons for keeping her, I think there's a couple. One of which is that she's seen as being able perhaps to reach different parts of the country, different parts of the party than Rishi Sunak is. Also perhaps the sense that she can say things that he, as Prime Minister, might not be able to. But I think it's also, as you say, about diminishing returns. And I think after a series of incidents right now where minister after minister is going out on morning rounds, you saw this with Grant Shapps yesterday, you saw this with Jeremy Hunt on Friday, and all they're being asked, do you agree with Suella Braverman or not, Tory splits being the theme, I think perhaps that calculation, as you say, Isabel, is tipping towards one conclusion.
What do you think she's saying that the Prime Minister's not able to? Is it about the homeless? Is it about the police? What?
Well, I think, yeah, being able perhaps to embrace some of the measures which, the Prime Minister himself would shy away from. And there's a certain logic to that in terms of being able to say things on immigration, perhaps, that as Prime Minister you wouldn't perhaps want to be able to say. But I do think that, it's reached the point now where there's increasingly a sense among mainstream Conservative opinion in the party that this is distracting from the government's real priorities. And so, therefore, they think, they're a bit done with Suella, and that's why there's talk of a reshuffle.
Now, you can tell us more about this than I would know. Apparently, there is something called the Whitehall Communications Grid, which is a big table,
yes,
and every day it's published, which says what the government's agenda is and all of that. Apparently it's blank,
yes,
for today. And that means everybody's saying, oh, they're planning to do a big reshuffle.
Well,
but would really the Prime Minister want to lose his Home Secretary 3 days before this big Rwanda Supreme Court hearing on Wednesday?
Well, this is the big issue, is that, as I understand it, there's blanks today and blanks Wednesday, and, of course, Wednesday is when that Supreme Court verdict comes down. This is what we saw last time, where we saw the reshuffle which replaced Ben Wallace with Grant Shapps. It was just announced on the morning, and suddenly the whole grid was cleared. But it's not just the grid in abstract. It's also the fact that Civil Service last week were told to prepare briefing packs for potential reshuffle. This doesn't happen, it's an infrequent thing, so sometimes it's prepared even though they're not used. So that's why there's a lot of heightened talk within Westminster and Whitehall about this happening. Personally, I think we're more likely to see it on Wednesday than we are today, but it can't be denied that I think that this is going to be the week it happens.
Rumour mill swirling about who would get what job. So say Suella's out, who's in?
That's the question. I think that it would probably be someone perhaps with a bit of a Home Office experience, or was also seen on the sort of right of the party. So I think there's two different categories there. One of which you could have someone who's a sort of loyalist to Rishi, someone like Mark Harper, Robert Jenrick, who's the Minister of State for Immigration, or perhaps you might want to put someone like Kemi Badenoch, who's probably going to be a sort of centre-right contender in the next leadership contest, someone who's been seen as more loyal to Rishi Sunak perhaps than Suella has. So someone like that could be a good person to fit in the brief. 12 months or so out from an election, you're going to want someone who can go out there and be a bit of a street fighter for you.
How James, is she emerging from all of this? How's she looking after the march at the weekend, after what she said about the homeless?
I think that, as you say, Eamon, twice in a week she sort of blew up the government grid, as Isabel was just saying there, what the government wanted to be talking about. So there's sort of question marks over that. I think that ahead of the protest on Saturday, there were fears it would be a lot worse than it was. There were 145 arrests out of 300,000 protesters. So there were some disturbing scenes there, but equally it wasn't as bad as some feared beforehand. And I think that if it had been much worse, then I think she could have said, perhaps, I'll be vindicated from that.
Except the police came out and said that the right-wing groups, the violence caused by them was unprecedented. And there are people today saying that is directly the responsibility of Suella Braverman, who publicly undermined the police days before. And these people came out thinking it was their job to protect the cenotaph. Do you think you can connect those dots?
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly some MPs who are saying that privately. I think that it's clearly going to be an issue in terms of the rhetoric. I think what the Prime Minister was willing to say last week and was sort of critical of the Met Police's decision to let this march go ahead, that was very different from what Suella Braverman chose to go a bit further and suggest that the police were biased in that Times article. So I think that's the key thing. How much agency can you subscribe to those words of the politicians? I think it's a debatable question, but it's one MPs are thinking about today.
OK.
James, appreciate your take on things. Keep us posted throughout the morning. James Heale is the political correspondent with The Spectator. Thank you very much indeed.